Hey guys, thanks for joining us for our Q&A tonight. This is going to be fun. I've explained it already. What we're going to do is we're going to smoke 2 different cigars tonight. You're going to go through 7 different spirits and a multitude of different Lagunitas over here as well. I'm going to introduce everyone. We'll start with Justin. Go ahead.
Hello everybody, my name is Justin. I'm with Lagunitas Brewing Company.
I'm Marc. I'm the general manager here at Santino's.
Tony, the Southern Glaze'sr and Spirits.
So you guys have already lit in. You've lit into your Mr. Brownstone, the Bullet. I put all the sheets out there so you guys see what it is. Nicaraguan Puro with the Habano wrapper on it. What you should notice from the cigar as you start to smoke is a little bit of bitterness at the front. That's going to come from that Habano wrapper that settles over the foot of the cigar. And then as it picks up, there's going to be a different nuance of spices and some sweet kind of blending that goes on as you go through it. So we're going to get this thing started right away. Aaron's going to come around and pour our first sample, which is
The 40 Creek Barrel Select.
okay.
Canadian whiskey.
What is it?
Canadian whiskey.
Okay.
So 2 Canadian whiskeys, 2 Irish, 2 Scotches, and then bourbon.
I think so. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we need to use it?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And
We'll
then,
pick up over the fan better. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So she's going to bring around the 40 Creek, and then Justin, what are you going to start with?
So we will start off with our flagship IPA, 6.2% alcohol, easy drinking, well balanced IPAs.
Alright, so as Aaron's bringing those samples around, I'm going to let Tony kind of crack off and talk about this 40 Creek for a minute. If you guys want, as you come by road, you can come up here and start your sample with a beer. Alright? So come up and get down whenever you're ready. Tony, go ahead.
Well, Aaron's pouring the 40 Creek. So we're doing 2 Canadian whiskeys, both from 40 Creek Distillery. 40 Creek was started back in the 90s by a guy who's been a winemaker for 40 years in Canada. His name's John Hall. One thing about Canadian whiskey, a lot of times Canadian whiskeys are very sweet because with Canadian whiskeys you can add 9% of anything you want. And a lot of times that ends up being sugar at the end or some sort of sweetener to make it smoother and easier to drink. One thing about 40 Creek, there's no adjuncts, so it's just grain. And they don't add anything at the end, so all the flavor is going to come from the grain and then the barrel. The first one is the Barrel Select. And what that is, so it's going to be corn, a little bit of rye, maybe some malted barley too, those different grains, aged in ex-bourbon cask, and then also new American oak. So oak that hasn't seen any spirit, so virgin oak.
Mike, I want to ask you first before we open up the Q&A. What are you thinking of it so far?
Just sip it. Give me a second here. Let me try another one.
Yeah, I'm not much of a Canadian whiskey fan, but drinking it, it does have some awesome sweetness to it. I think there's a nice little sweetness on the back end. I still think it's got that Canadian burn. I hate to tame it this way, but that Crown Royal burn. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. But it's really not bad. I'm kind of interested in the Copper Pot, the next sample that comes out. But Mike, what do you think?
And I don't really want to speak out of line. Maybe Tony, you can jump in. But I think some people think that Canadian whiskey is kind of like the stepchild of bourbon in the U.S. and it's really not. It's almost a whole nother category. I prefer it for the simple fact, I don't like strong burning bourbon and Scotch. But the nuance I pick up is what you said, no adjuncts of the sweet flavors that they could have infused for their 9%. So to me, it tastes more like a traditional, maybe like 80 proof whiskey versus what you think of as a traditional Canadian whiskey with that sweetness.
So Canadian whiskey is really back during that dark era in the U.S. known as Prohibition, when most distilleries here had to stop production. That's when Canadian whiskeys really started booming because people still wanted to drink, even though it was illegal. So, like I said, a lot of distilleries, Canadian whiskeys got really big. There were distilleries all over the country. As taste changed in the late 60s and 70s, people went more towards white spirits. So the Canadian whiskey industry, like the bourbon industry, took a decline. Everything now, all whiskeys are on the upswing, and so it's. I forget where I was going with this, but is there any questions, please? Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions on the 40 Creek so far, go nuts. Or anything, any question. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Justin. Justin, I want you to say a little bit something about the 40 Creek, but then dive into that flagship IPA.
So as far as the 40 Creek goes, I'm kind of with Mark on this one. I'm not much of a Canadian whiskey drinker myself, but not too bad. As far as the IPA goes, this is for sure our flagship IPA. It's kind of what we hang our hat on. When Tony McGee first got the brewery started in 1995, he started with 5 classic styles that he was selling to folks in the area as their house beer. Once money kind of allowed for him to deviate from that, this is one of the first seasonals that he put out. It quickly became our best-selling beer and has kind of driven Lagunitas to where we are today. It is the #1 selling IPA in the country at this point. We are distributed in all 50 states and 32 countries around the world.
All right, anyone have any questions on anything so far? How's the cigar? Eucalyptus. All right, I'll take that. All right. My favorite table in the back, guys. How are we liking that cigar so far?
So for some of you who maybe have never had a Nicaraguan Puro cigar, that the one of the biggest problems people have when they smoke them, Mark, jump in here, is they'll have 2 or 3 puffs and oh, it's bitter, it's spicy, it tastes like pepper, and they put it out and they never smoke again for 20 years. Once you get past that first half an inch, that bitter taste will subside and that cigar will open up, and because what you're doing, you're burning the ends of the tobacco that were rolled, and that's where you're getting the bitter taste from. Past that first half an inch, that cigar starts changing. They're generally smoked in first, second, and third thirds, and a lot of times these cigars change drastically in each of those thirds, and that's the cool nuances that you're looking for.
Yeah, he said it exactly the way it should be. You know, Nicaraguan tobacco is known a lot of times for its spices, especially something from the Jalapa Valley or anywhere down the lower valleys of Nicaragua. You're going to get a lot of spice in the cigar. But what comes with that spice, because of all the purity in the soil, is you get a lot of flavor change value that's going to come in the cigar. You know, I'm not going to start putting names to anything because I'm not that guy, but what you taste will be a little different than what I taste. But typically, you smoke a Nicaraguan Puro and you're never disappointed. Hopefully, that's the way it should go. So, any questions on any of that? Anything anybody want to say?
When you say the wrap or Nicaraguan Habano, is that a Cuban seed?
Well, if you want to get technical, every single seed that's ever been planted for tobacco is a Cuban seed. Even everything to this day, all the seeds came from Cuba. Now it's just years down the road lineage in the seed, but Habano is a type of plant leaf grown. It is used very often. Typically, Habano wrappers are not as dark as you see on the brownstone. That's actually a very dark Habano, to be honest. Habanos are known for, if you feel the cigar, it's got an almost good mid-grade silkiness, but it's also slightly rough. You know, you can look at the cigar and see the veins from the leaf in it, but you can't feel the vein on the wrapper at all. It's a great quality that Habano wrappers have a lot of times. Oh, okay. Yeah. Right. Okay, yeah. All right, well, we'll do that next time. All right. So what did everyone think of that 40 Creek, that first sample? What did we think?
think it's time to move on to the second sample?
All right, so what we'll do now, guys, we're going to bring around, what are we doing next? So we're going to do the 40 Creek Copper Pot. That's coming next. And then, Justin, what do we got?
We'll do the daytime session IPA. Unfortunately, with this one, it's not exactly meant to be paired with cigars, so because it's considerably lighter than the original IPA. Clocks in at 4% ABV, 98 calories, and 3 carbs per can. Nice citrusy notes to it, but like I said, unfortunately, I think it is diet beer, but it's got flavor to it. Unfortunately, I think the cigars may overpower this one, but it is a pretty good, tasty, everyday drinking beer.
So when it comes to tasting, before we get super deep into this, I probably should have started with this. Typically, a lot of times when you pair something, you're playing against strengths. You're not trying to go heads up. You're not trying to do something that's gonna equally compare in strength value. You want something that's gonna complement the other. So this cigar, the Mr. Brownstone, is definitely gonna drown out that daytime IPA. So if you take a sip of water, switch it around your mouth, swallow it, and try the IPA, it will definitely give you a different taste profile for it before you put the cigar back in. So your samples are coming around now. We'll get those poured, and then we'll dive into that, guys.
So with the second whiskey, major difference is the way they make it. So the 40 Creek Barrel Select is they're going to use what is commonly known as a bourbon still. And bourbon still is a hybrid of a column still and a pot still. And then this copper pot is going to be done all in a copper pot still. So copper pot distilling is much less efficient because you have to do it one batch at a time. So you ferment your mash and you put it in the still and you distill it, and you have to clean your kettle and then do it again. Whereas with your column stills, your mash comes into the top, there's different stripping plates, and the distillation happens, it's much more efficient. It's a continuous distillation as opposed to a batch. So with batch distillation, you're going to get a little bit, I'd say more full-bodied whiskey. So yeah, I'll have a little bit more. I'm not scared. I think my wife's going to come pick me up, so. So I think compared to the first one, this is going to be a little richer, a little rounder body, and more flavor. So, yeah.
Just once you get home, so.
No, it's yes.
Okay, I'll be fine. I can walk. I can walk. I ain't worried about I'm good. You're good. You're good.
Alrighty, so a little bit more information on the daytime. Since this one is only 4% ABV, it's brewed with a little bit different malt bill than the original IPA. We threw a little bit more wheat, a little bit more oats into this one to give it a little bit more mouthfeel. It is a distinctly lighter beer, but we wanted it to feel like something bigger than it was. We do use the same amount of hops per barrel in the daytime as we do with our flagship IPA, just to give it that full flavor. This one was originally in bombers for years. It's been a part of our lineup for a long time, but we recently reformulated it a bit to throw it into cans because that's kind of the direction the industry's going. So yeah, my favorite thing to do with this one, anybody that's drinking Mick Ultra, Bud Light, give this one a shot. It's pretty much the same calorie and carb count as any of your domestics. Yes, it is diet beer.
It's all diet beer. So has everyone gotten into the copper pot? I gotta say, I think all of us agreed we really prefer this over the Barrel Select. It's got some very it's got like a rainbow of sorts when you taste it. It starts slightly spicy for me, but then it finishes off real like a cooking sweet. It's actually a really good kind of finish on it. I definitely enjoy that over the Barrel Select, man.
Yeah, I get some subtle baking spices in it. I agree. I think it's a little bit more quality than the first one.
Well, no, I think you did a good job. I mean, there's baking spices, and then I think there's a real nice fruitiness to it. Maybe a little cherry, some stone fruits. So, and this one is a couple points higher in alcohol. So this is 86 proof as opposed to 80, and a lot of times that, that helps with the body and flavor too.
So a little tasting trick I want you guys to try. Take your cigar, take a draw off the cigar, blow out the smoke, and push your tongue against the roof of your mouth. Okay? Now once you do that, take a sip of this copper pot, let it sit in the middle of your mouth for a second, and finish it down. Now breathe out through your nose. Those flavors you're finding in the back of your throat right now, that is your pairing taste. That's what you're picking up. Neat little trick, huh? I think so. Alright. So, with the cigar, there are numerous ways that you can get more out of the flavor of a cigar. Now, cigars do tend to build as you get through and through the cigar, as you get towards the shoulders and the head after you've already cut into the cap. There's something called a retrohale. If anyone's ever smoked cigarettes or you smoke weed, it doesn't matter. Someone's done it. You blow the smoke out through your nose. Okay, now with cigars, you do not want to inhale these, and I'll know if which one of you do, because we'll point and laugh. Honestly, no, I'm kidding. But if you've never retrohaled, you want to try to retrohale. All you do is draw the smoke in your mouth, hold it in your mouth, and swallow. When you swallow and breathe through your nose, all that smoke will stop at the back of your throat and come up through your nasal cavity. What you will find is a very different variety of flavor than you're tasting directly on your palate, because when you take your sense of smell and your sense of taste and you combine them, you open up different nuances and different feelings of the tobacco, the nicotine, everything involved. I got one.
I used to choke like that too. Keep trying it, because it is amazing. There's just as much floral components, nuances, whatever you want to call it, and there is no flavor or that's going to be the same for everyone, right? If I pick up marzipan, you're not going to pick it up. You might pick up cocoa or whatever. So the cool thing about cigars is there's just as much variety in taste, body, and flavor as there with bourbon or scotch or anything else. And so it does take a little bit to try to learn that retro inhale, but if you get it, you will definitely pick up those flavors, because your olfactory senses at the base of your nose is your best taste buds. So if you learn that process, it's fun.
All right, guys, let's take a couple minutes and smoke and drink on this 40 Creek Copper Pot. Anybody got any questions or anything they want to talk about? Go nuts. No blues talk. Dean, what are you thinking, man? Are you on mute? Chill. Ah, okay. Chill. Dave? Marc? Marty, how's that size?
Good.
Both of you, how's that size? How you like this stuff?
Good. Enjoy it. You're right though, the bitterness first, and then it's like, okay.
There's a lot of people that give up on cigars because of that bitterness. In the
Ah,
first half
hell.
of it. And then they never taste it again in a cigar until they just keep smoking.
That's just quitters.
You guys back there working on that retro ale or what?
We're working on some. I was wondering how many people prefer the whiskey to the beer as a pairing, because it's a very different experience. But that beer stands up. And I can't always say that, because there's a lot of beer that really gets, the flavor gets cut out by the intense flavor of the cigar, and this one stands up.
Which beer is standing up? The daytime? First or second beer? The first one? Yeah. I'll let Justin talk a little more, but Lagunitas IPA is they call it their flagship. That's kind of the and when I say generic, I don't mean that it's not good, but if you go anywhere that doesn't have any kind of craft beer, it's either Lagunitas or one other that's on tap. It's a very comfortable drinking beer, and it does. I think it's got enough in it that it can hold up with some of the fullest cigars. So just go ahead.
Yeah, so with our IPA, it was meant to be paired. It does have honey to it. It is brewed with a combination of Cascade and Centennial hops to give it kind of that floral component up front. But it's got a good combination of Crystal, Pilsner, and caramel malt on the back end, which is that sweetness, which I think would stand up pretty well with the cigars. Like I said, that was one of our first seasonals that Tony put out back in the day, with the thinking that something more bold would sell, and there was definitely a market for it. Because it is so well balanced, I guess I wouldn't say generic, but it is a good first step into the IPA category because it's not too overpowering with the bitterness. A lot of what you're seeing today, things are going a lot more citrusy, juicy, things like that. This one's kind of a callback to the old guard with West Coast IPAs that are meant to be more well balanced and kind of an everyday drinking type of beer.
I haven't had the second one yet.
You still have that? The daytime?
All right, we'll let Mike pour his beer. What we're going to do in between these two cigars is Justin here brought some fun Lagunitas swag. That is closed in case anyone wasn't aware. Swag. What'd you bring? Koozies. That's not swag, that's a koozie. It's a different thing. But what we'll do in between the cigars before we move on to the second one, we got a couple more pairings before we move on. I'm going to let whoever can give me the best retro hell experience, I'm going to let him give you something. That's what I'm going to do. Yep, there's. So, what's everyone think of that total on that 40 Creek? We're getting ready to move on from Canadian. Yeah. Second one? Right. All right. Everyone ready to keep going? All right. It's my favorite. This guy. All right, look at him. All right, so we're gonna keep this thing going. We are moving on to
Slane Irish whiskey, Slane Irish whiskey, triple cask.
Slane.
Sorry. Yeah, so Irish whiskey certainly seen a renaissance. For years in the U.S., actually in Ireland too. I mean, distilleries were closing at a rapid pace, and it got down to where there was really only two distilleries. There's Jameson and Bushmills. That was essentially what Irish whiskey had become. Over the last 5 years, there's been 30 new distilleries open. Slane is one of those. So this is their first Marc. It's Slane Triple Cask. So what that means, it's ex-bourbon and Tennessee whiskey. So Jack Daniel's, Old Forester, Woodford Reserve barrels. Then virgin American oak, so never had a whiskey in it, and then also ex Oloroso sherry barrels. So the sherry is going to give it a little more like a nutty, raisiny character. One thing that when you're tasting whiskey, a lot of times the alcohol vapors, when you go to smell it, can be a little overpowering. So if you really want to get the sense in the whiskey, dab your finger in the whiskey, and then if assuming you don't have any scent on your wrist, just rub a little bit into your wrist, and what that'll do is allow you to really smell the whiskey without the alcohol. So
Mike, you got anything, bud?
Thank you.
I need more questions from the audience.
I thought it was apple.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
There's that sherry on the barrels.
But they said that.
All right, everyone. I just had my taste, and off the cuff, 5 seconds ago, I think this is for all as popular as Jameson is, just regular Jameson, not the 18-year, not the Black Barrel, not all the other ones we have, but I think this is a substantially better Irish whiskey than regular Jameson. I can taste the raisins and the sweetness of it. I wouldn't want to have a regular Jameson after this.
Cheers, guys.
What do they say? Slash it.
What's up, Mark?
What's the retail price point on that? One slate? Yeah.
There's an old man sitting next to me.
I kind of laughed Mike saying I'll never have a Jameson again. I don't think I ever had one, but no. No, I definitely think as far as Irish whiskeys go, the body is the right verbiage for it. It's got a lot more. That word complexity, we throw it around a lot. I do. I throw it around a lot. It's my bailout word for when I don't know what I'm talking about. But no, it's definitely heavier. It's got more body. It's got more of a presence, in the glass, in your mouth. It handles real well. That's what she said. That. So, what's everyone think so far?
Right. And absolutely. The idea is just to showcase different styles of whiskey. I didn't make any of these, so if there's something you hate, feel free to say it. You're not gonna hurt my feelings.
The caveat should have really been by me, and I shouldn't have said it this way. There's nothing wrong with Jameson. Jameson has its place, but you could sip this. I don't think people tend to sip Jameson much. It's not really.
Yeah, I see you.
Yeah.
That's right.
There will be none of that. There will be none of that. All right, I'm gonna force this out of all of you. Table in the back, favorite people of the night. Yeah, look at them. Yeah. What do we think so far? I like rum. I don't. The rum is gone.
We'll do rum another time.
Just a general note. When you go into your favorite establishment, whether it's a restaurant, a bar, anywhere you like to just hang out, a lot of times you see bottles when you go to your favorite place that you've never heard of or you've never tried. And what happens? You don't try them, right? Because you've never had them. So when you go to a reputable place, a place like this or other places, if you see something on the wall, I mean, we have 400 bottles. People have had them all. But ask. A lot of times we'll give you a free sample, even if it's a high dollar allocated bourbon or scotch. We'll give you a little bit to try. So don't ever hesitate to ask your favorite establishment if they'll do that. Because a lot of times we bring in liquor, guys, all the time. And it'll sit. And unless we can really push it and let somebody try it, they don't. And it could be the next favorite thing you've had that you haven't tried because you don't know what it is. So just ask a lot of times.
Happy tastes like my sample out.
That'll work. Chief, Marty, what are we thinking, guys? Hello to the third row.
I'm good.
Ladies, hello. No? Look at it. Mark, Dave, what do we think, guys?
So actually, that's one of the reasons why I asked about the retail price point, because I was thinking,
$28 to $30 retail. $28 to $30.
is a regular Jameson drinker and they like this, it's a fair consideration, especially if they're smoking when they drink it.
So the price point is that at a place like this, guys, it would be what I would charge for a well drink. Okay. And my well is not equal to anyone's well. I think it's
That means $6 to $8.
no, not even that.
It's 5 or 6. What we don't have well liquor here, as Tony can attest to. What my well is would be what most establishments' top shelf is. So, guys, for a $5 drink, this is something that you could get, quote unquote, well. Anywhere else, this would be their high standard.
Now the next one, that's not the case.
Well, he let you down easy there, sir.
Difference between like Scotch and Irish whiskey. I'm kind of new to Irish whiskey.
Countries.
Scotch always feels like it has more body to it.
So the difference, I mean, the main difference is, yes, as Mark said, different countries, but Scotch, especially single malt Scotch, there's a lot more regulations to make Scotch than there is to make Irish whiskey. So Scotch, the two Scotch we're going to try, it has to be 100% malted barley, distilled in copper pot stills. In Ireland, you can use any grain you want. You can use any kind of still you want. There's no outside of aging for 2 years. There's no other real laws. You can't add anything to it, but you can use whatever grain and whatever still. So and whatever barrel, and there's a lot less regulation to making Irish whiskey than there is to making Scotch.
Well, on a bottle of James, it's triple distilled. Does that really mean anything significant as far as the taste goes?
Yes. So the more you distill, the more congeners you strip out of it. So there's loads of different alcohols that develop during distillation. And what that is, ethanol is the only one that is fit for human consumption. It's all poison, but the other ones will kill you or make you go blind or whatever. So when you distill, if you're doing a pot distillation, you have to cut off like the heads and the tails, because the alcohols that are produced when distillation starts and the ones at the end is too hot. Those are the ones that would make you go blind, or there's been a few deaths over the last few months in different countries, and largely it's due to poorly made alcohol. They're just doing a distillation, and that's part of it too. But like those first alcohols that come off, people the first like 10-12%, you have to either cut it off and either redistill it or throw it away. And then the last 10%, same thing. What's that? Or clean with it. Yes, you can clean with it. You shouldn't drink it.
What's the life once you open a bottle of sherry or whiskey or Canadian? What's usually the life after you open the bottle of a
So realistically, as long as it's not, getting, exposed to a lot of sunlight or it's getting really, really hot, the shelf life is indefinite. It doesn't go bad. It does change. So once you open it and it oxidizes a little bit, because you got to imagine, like, so something like this was in a barrel for 12 years. Barrel's it's not a sealed environment. So realistically, it never goes bad once it's distilled. They do change a little bit. Like if something's open too long, the flavors might get a little flat. If it's if you leave it somewhere and it gets hot, you might see some evaporation, and what used to be 80 proof might now be 90 proof, because the water will evaporate and you concentrate the alcohol. But as far as it going bad, it's not wine. Wine will will turn to vinegar in a relatively short time. Whiskey lasts forever.
So I want to play on that on the cigar side, because spirits and cigars are two of the same kind of thing in different realms. So you get a question a lot of times. People talk about aging tobacco. How long can a cigar stay fresh? This and that. So tobacco, even once it's picked, aged, maduroed, used in the pilons, whatever, before it's rolled, tobacco is always a living organism forever. As long as you keep a cigar in the proper environment, relative to each other inside, that 70-70 rule. That 70-70 rule plays. Different places in the world have different humidity counts, different average temperatures. You play on that rule. So if you keep a cigar, which we will actually talk about when we get to this tatuaje, there's something very special about the wrapper on this cigar. But when you have a cigar and you keep it in a proper place, it's stored properly. I mean, I've got cigars that are 37 years old. Cigars can age forever as long as they are taken care of.
Well, can you go over the difference between tobacco fermentation and the fermentation that in alcohol with, say, such as whiskey and whiskey? Yes.
Well, you're lucky. You've got 2 certified tobacconists in the same building. There's probably not 2 in the whole state. Aging tobacco is, people have this all wrong. You walk into Humidor and you see light-colored cigars, medium-colored cigars, and dark colors. And we all assume the dark ones are the strong ones, right? They're the Maduro. Maduro is the wrong description for that. Aging cigars, that painting on the wall next to you that shows the cigars, all the way to the left is where they come off the plant, green, when they hang them. As they age, that's the aging process. So that when you say Maduro, you're describing the strength. You're not describing the age. Age is derived the longer. Well, there's all kinds of criteria. They hang it, and you see as it starts turning colors, and then they decide when they want to choose that and roll it. And then there's, Marc, you could talk the other distinctions where they put it in the pelons and all that stuff.
So before we talk about all the almost same sort of operations that spirits go through, as Mike said, Maduro means strength. Maduro loosely translates to maturation. So the longer a leaf sits in a pelon is a circle or square box hanging that all the leaves are stacked into, with sometimes they're used in moist cloth, and sometimes they're used just in their natural environment. The longer they sit, the longer they Maduro, or they Añejo, I'm not saying that right, that just means age. So a cigar is always aging. Much to what Tony said about spirits when they open, depending on the climate they're in, that aging thing that I said about cigars, certain cigars are not meant to be aged. A lot of cigars, like we're going to talk about this Tatuaje when we get to it, a lot of cigars sit for almost 5 to 15 years before they're even boxed and sent out to retailers. So certain cigars cannot be aged any longer.
That would not be a Swisher Sweet, by the way. That's not a cigar.
No, that's bubble gum and toilet paper. You shut your mouth, you dog. So what, like he said, how certain flavors will go flat in a bottle. Certain cigars, it's called marrying. The flavors, as the tobacco sits, there's always minerals and orients inside the tobacco itself. Certain cigars that cannot be aged very long, as they sit, those flavors will marry together. So if you have a very strong cigar the first time you smoke it, and it's already been aged 8 to 10 years before you smoked it, if you age that thing for 10 more years, the next time you smoke it, it's going to be very light. Because all the minerals have escaped, they've evaporated away from the tobacco, they've come to the surface. Sometimes you have what's called pluming, which a lot of people get mixed up with mold. When you have these little crystalline features that appear on the top of a cigar, that is the prime moment to smoke that cigar. That means that all of its mineral body count has come to the surface of the tobacco, and you're going to get the best flavor experience you're ever going to get out of the cigar. That being said, like I said, as certain tobaccos sit, they will marry together. You have to be very careful when you come to aging cigars or storing cigars for a long time, because the longer the cigar actually sits rolled, or even sometimes as long as the leaf sat and was waited to be rolled, you will lose those flavors, just much like the spirit will go flat. So now Mike, you do you, and then Tony talk about the spirit side.
Before Tony jumps in, if Tony can dovetail off of me. You know, one other thing too, just like and Tony can talk more about this, just like a master distiller walks around his rick houses and he can choose any barrel and they'll test it just to make sure it's progressing down the right path. It's where they want it to be for that particular brand. Cigars are the same way. The tobacconist is walking around the farm, walking around those pelons. They're testing temperature. They're testing all kinds of things. So it's just as complicated. The cool thing about cigars and libations is it's almost the same complicated formula for 2 different things.
So just to touch on
what they're saying. So as far as whiskey, so we talk about fermentation. So to start, to make a whiskey, you have to first make a beer. So essentially, what they do is they'll take whatever grain and they'll malt it. Generally malt it because you need to have something that will help convert those starches into fermentable sugars. And then once you convert those, so they, a lot of times they get it wet, they make their wort, and then that creates a sugary liquid. Then they add the yeast. That sugary liquid will ferment, and it'll ferment, to about, anywhere from 6 to 10% alcohol. That's what they distill. So distillation is simply the separation of alcohol from water. So if you have 1,000 gallons of wort or mash that goes into your still, you're probably going to get about 100 gallons of alcohol. So it's about 10%, right? So if you start with something that's 8 to 10% alcohol, you distill it, you're going to lose 90% of your volume, but then you're going to have something that's over 100 proof, or probably in that 60 to 70% range alcohol wise. So that's, you start with fermentation, yeast. So fermentation simply is, yeast eats sugar, and the byproduct is heat, CO2, and alcohol. So that's fermentation, and then from there, so like I said, they call it distiller's beer. So that's just like beer is grain and or whatever other ingredients that they ferment it. You just need yeast, and then they take that and distill it to make whiskey, vodka, gin, whatever whatever distillate you're looking for.
So all of that being said, drink your beer as fresh as possible. There's a little bit of debate going on these days with a lot of the higher ABV barrel-aged beers, people wanting to set them aside and see what they taste like a couple years down the road. I tend to be in the camp that as soon as that beer has been bottled, that's what the brewmaster intended for it to taste like. Especially when it comes to these IPAs, you want to drink them as fresh as possible. Typically, you're looking at about 3 months shelf life on a lot of these. But if you let our IPA or daytime sit around for 6 months in your fridge, it's not going to be at all what it was intended to taste like whatsoever. So, a lot of flowery stuff going on over here. I'm here to say, just drink your beer as fresh as possible. At the very longest. I mean, most of the beer you're going to find on shelves, if we're doing our jobs correctly, are going to be within the last month since it was bottled. So you want to open that up as fresh as possible. Right. Yeah. I don't know how much credit we want to give Sam Adams right now.
Marc, go ahead.
There's kind of a theory about strictly using only tobacco in cigars. What would happen if you took the same hops that he uses in his IPA and combined it in a cigar?
Well, one, that's very complicated because the average cigar leaf, the average tobacco leaf is about 13 to 14 inches long. And the entirety, and the thing that makes it so beautiful is the only thing involved in this is tobacco leaf. You know what a hop looks like. So now Ted's has done it. Ted Cigars has done it with their hop cigar. We do sell that, ladies and gentlemen. It is available here. No, but they have done it, and what they did is they took a barrel of hops, mashed them down, then took the interior, the wrapper leaf of the tobacco, laid it in a pilon, put the barrel in the middle of the pilon, wrapped the tobacco around it, and gave that some time. The problem is that there's too much citrus and is spice the right word?
Yeah.
Maybe the little sting that comes out of hops that goes into beer, that crispness that you get from a very hoppy IPA. What that will do to tobacco is it will actually cause the flavor mute in the natural tobacco to come down. You can apply too young of a leaf, or you can ferment something too long, and it will, in a way, kind of be the fountain of youth to tobacco. You can cause the tobacco to still maduro, it will still mature, and it will still work its way. But if you apply something like a hop, which is a very ripe-picked item that is applied to tobacco, it causes the minerals and the natural organisms in tobacco to sort of stop their maturation rate. Maturation, whatever. Their mature rate, it's going to slow that down. Why don't you laugh at me? Look at me, laugh at me. Nah. But so that's the problem. You really can't do that. That's what makes certain cigars very. Now it's on. I turned it off. What makes certain wrapper leaves very special is the way they do age them. You have things like the Perdomo Champagne, where they're aged in port wine barrels. So what means there is they just use the champagne barrel to make the leaf age inside of it to pick up the nuances of the barrel. Yes, and that's not an infusion. What that is, that's a marrying process. We talked about cigars that age, and sometimes they marry together. You put a wrapper leaf inside of a barrel like that, and you pick up the essence of the item in which it's sitting. That's the way that works. Hang on. Dave, go ahead. So every premium cigar, and what I mean by premium cigars, I'm not saying that Drew Estate's acid and the infusions, they're not there. They are still premium because they are hand rolled. But when you look at an uninfused cigar, the flavors that come from that tobacco are from the priming that it's picked from, meaning the level of the leaf picked off the plant, the soil content involved in the soil in which it was planted, and the way it was grown. So you have shade grown, half shade grown, you have full sun grown, you have environmental grown. So what happens is those flavors are chosen by master blenders, people that, like I know a lot about tobacco. I don't know a third of what these guys have been doing this for, 5-6 generations of family, grew up on it. All the flavor that comes out of these cigars we're smoking right now, these brownstones, all this flavor, there's nothing added to these cigars. The only additive added to it is the glucose sealant that is used to put the cap on. Any time that you have a naturally aged wrapper, like we said the Perdomo Champagne. Well, Connecticut is very special because it's only grown. A true Connecticut is grown, hence the name. That's where it's grown, and it's grown in very small amounts because it has to be grown very quickly. It has to be grown under shade, and it has to be grown inside a season before the seasons start to affect the growing planes. Anytime you have something like the Champagne where it's set in age, the only thing that is aged to taste is the wrapper. And all those flavors come from, like I use that marrying word. Think about it. You take two things, you put them together, you get a marriage, right? They sit inside that barrel and they pick up, you talk about the angel's envy, the devil's cut in a barrel. So when it sits in there, it picks up the remaining aerated nuances that come from the barrel. And that's it. Yeah, that's it.
So the question was asked about infusing hops into a cigar, and realistically, no one smokes hops. However, lots of people enjoy smoking one of its cousins. So, once or twice, yeah. So yes, so cannabis and hops closely related. If you didn't catch on, yeah. But then, and also, some people have made whiskey out of IPAs. If you see it, run, because they're terrible. They are just god-awful. Terrible. Amador, well, so they're Amador, and then Charbet makes a hop whiskey, and they're awful. Just go. Everything that's great about IPAs becomes terrible when you distill it and then age it in barrel. It's awful. Don't drink them. Yeah. So, but then also, Mike and we were just talking up here about the aging process of whiskey, and so whiskey goes into barrel, then it goes into a warehouse. So the aging the environment clearly in Scotland, Ireland is much different than for bourbon. But
To dovetail off of what Tony is saying about the aging process, I really like him to go into the rickhouse description, because there are a lot of people know about Buffalo Trace, right? It's pretty much considered the world-renowned bourbon, right? Your Pappy Van Winkles, your Elmer T. Lees, all that stuff on that top shelf is what's called the antique collection. But what a lot of people don't realize, the mash bill that creates some of this good stuff, is the mash bill is identical. It's where they put those barrels, what level of the rick house, whether it's north, south, east, or west facing, whether it's 4 floors up or on the bottom floor, and maybe Tony, you can go into a little bit more detail. So when you start with the same mash bill, you wonder, how do you get all these other multiple brands or multiple bottles in one brand? Let Tony explain this.
yeah, so like Mike said, the distiller's rule of thumb is that more than half the flavor of the finished product comes from the aging process, and that's what you put it in, and how long and where it's aged. So we'll talk about bourbon. Traditional rickhouse for bourbon is about 9 stories tall, and very traditional ones are like, so the bourbon we're gonna have later, it's timber and tin, right? So it's built out of wood and then just wrapped in no air conditioning, just subject to if it's 100 degrees outside, you walk in, the bottom floor is probably about 90 degrees. The middle floor is going to be about 100 degrees, and then the top might be 140 degrees. It gets, because the heat gets trapped in there. So with bourbon especially, whiskey is aged on the bottom floors. If they go into barrel, you can go in it up to 125 proof. Most people don't go in that high. So the whiskey's aged on like those first 3 floors. After 5 years, if they went in at 120 proof, they're probably about 110. Whiskeys from floors 4 through 6, if they went in 120 proof, they're about 120 proof 5-6 years later. Whiskeys on the top floors, you're going to gain proof because it gets so hot that the water can evaporate faster than the alcohol. So, but you got a question, Mark?
One is, I wondered whether anybody tried to take derivative of heat quality, try to capture that in the cigar. And the second is, for the cigars, for the tobacco that's aged in barrels, what's the temperature effect in a case like that, where you start aging tobacco in upper level of a building? I mean, does the whiskey effectiveness? I understand temperature change where there's greater absorption in whiskey in the summer and the contraction in the winter. But there's no liquid content in the dry tobacco.
Well,
somewhere more tropical.
So
the texture fluctuation on pH rate is
Yeah, so the biggest difference that you find between the rickhouse heights and tobacco is in tobacco, when they are stacked in their barn, they are rotated every 6 weeks. Every tobacco leaf hung on a hanging branch is rotated from the bottom of the storehouse to the top of it. They're always the being grown in those tropical environments. You have Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic. You've got Jamaican tobacco, Mexican San Andreas tobacco. You got Honduran tobacco. They're all in places where typically throughout a year, you really don't fluctuate that much in the humidity percentage that's going through the country itself. So with tobacco, there is no grade of tobacco that changes in its store height. Every leaf goes through different store heights in the barn. What changes the age or the effectiveness of the tobacco, like how they talk about the storehouse where the whiskey goes and things like that, they store those in certain places for certain effects, right? Tobacco is always rotated. Where the certain effects come from tobacco is once it's placed in the pilon, wrapped up and stored. That's where that effect comes into place. Yes, yes, yes. Dave, go ahead, bud. Sometimes there are certain families that do apply much like a cheesecloth, or they take it's called a soup rag, right? It's a wheat based rag, and they will wipe the tobacco down.
At the LFD's factory in Santo Domingo, they only allow women to do this process, and it's in a separate room away from the men. The men only roll the cigars. There's no women's rights, unfortunately. And the women, though, in this, now this is LFD's proprietary formula. Women are in another room, and they have like these big bowls, and they take the leaf of tobacco, and they dip it in the bowls of water. And their formula is to get them really wet before they're rolled. So not every company does that.
It's all based upon the company. Certain companies allow just the natural moisture in the air to age their tobacco, and it's not that one company does it better. It's the whole moistening of tobacco is as old as cigars itself, as pipe tobacco itself, as tobacco was being grown by the Native Americans when it was done in France in the 1600s. It's as old as itself. Different people did different things, but a lot of times there are less companies that actually moisten their tobacco, and they allow the other companies allow the natural moisture in the air to moisten the tobacco. Now that also falls in line with the different types of tobacco you picked. So you've got two plants. You have the Criollo and the Corojo plant. Those are the only two plants that ever grow. Okay, the different primings that you pick. Priming again means levels of tobacco. The different primings that you pick come into play as to what you're going to do with them. Now you have some companies that if you have a mid-level priming or a low-level priming, those are set in place to mature in the natural moisture. But if you're producing a certain kind of wrapper, you want a certain effect in wrapper tobacco that's been picked to be wrapper tobacco, they may moisten it, but it's only moistened one time. It's never, once it's moistened and laid into a pilon, it's not done again. You can't do that. No.
Yeah, I just felt weird going to a wedding with a certain shoe. Yeah, it is. Lucille was a good guy, right? He was a stand-up guy. And Mary said she was the librarian. She went one of the bar girls. She was on there. She was very intelligent.
Right. Yeah. So anytime anything goes into a barrel to be barrel aged, there is no moistening effect at all, because what you're trying to, if you moisten the tobacco and you lock it into a barrel, right? Barrels are not they're not windproof, they're not full. Exactly. It's going to mold. The extra moisture, it won't be your top leaves. It won't even be from the bottom third up. Everything in the bottom, when you pull it out, will look like a field of grass. It will mold. You can't moisten something and lock it into a place. Even if it aerates, even if there's room for the air to come through the barrel, you can't do that. It won't work. So anytime something is added into a barrel, you're using the idea is that you're using the remnants of what was in the barrel to pull it. The moisture you get is the moisture from the stage. You're trying to get that moisture into the cigar, and that's why even when they're put into barrels, like Mike said, they're constant. Everything is constantly rotated, checking temperatures. If it decides to rain one day, everything on the top of the aging barn comes to the bottom because moisture rises, right? Humidity causes temperature to rise. You don't want what's been aged in the top of the barn, because as that moisture rises, you're going to mold the leaf. You can't do that.
Go ahead,
It's all wrapped.
Because you know a lot about history and how his own stuff. I've known you since she was already dead. Yeah. And she said, I'm curious. So, I didn't think she'd go that far. I did not have anything. Yeah, I knew she was extremely intelligent. I thought, she was trying to please, give you a stay in on her. And that shit, so sharp to see how it yeah, because on television, I can see more.
If you did it, you would have.
Yeah.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah, which is good and bad because I was tired of being here.
I didn't hear the question. No, not at all.
I do want to talk about I want to talk about the whiskey real quick, that because we didn't touch on the last one was poured, and then we'll get. So, the last whiskey was poured is it's Teeling single malt Irish whiskey. So what that is, John Teeling restarted this distillery, opened the distillery in 2015. However, he was purchasing barrels from other distilleries. So there's whiskey going back to 91. That was distilled in 91. So there's whiskey up to 25 years old in here. But it was a single malt. So what that is, this is 100% malted barley, much in the vein that Scotch is. Whereas like Slane is going to be some barley, some rye, some corn, whatever grain they want to use, much like the 40 Creek stuff. But then when you're talking about aging, I said, with distillers, the more than half the flavor of a whiskey comes from aging. So 12 years in Scotland is much different than 12 years in Kentucky, right? So 12 years for a single malt is not terribly old. 15 years for a single malt, not terribly old. 40 years for a single malt is an old Scotch. 40-year-old bourbon is undrinkable, because there's too many seasons. One, not very good. Right. Yeah. Oh.
So say then. Ask the questions. I hear you. I hear you.
Tealing's actually very sweet.
Right.
Here,
So,
The Irish,
right. Well, so when you're making whiskey, correct, yeah. So when you're making whiskey, so outside of bourbon, no other whiskey relies on new barrels. So with bourbon, and we'll taste the bourbon last. But when you see charcoal filtered on the label, every bourbon is charcoal filtered, because every bourbon goes into a brand new charred white American oak barrel. So as it gets hot, it expands, pushes out through. That's filtering, yes. So and most of these whiskeys are going to go into ex-bourbon, so they're not going to get as much flavor. There's not going to be as much caramelized sugar left, because it's it spent 6 to 12 to 15 years aging bourbon. They're looking with Scotch, with Irish whiskey, generally speaking, they're looking just for the vessel, because they want something that's watertight but not airtight, right? So it allows the spirit to mature and without imparting a ton of flavor. Whereas bourbon, the barrel imparts a ton of flavor. When you're using sherry barrels, those impart quite a bit of flavor, because sherry is such a strong, unique flavor. That's why you get like that really red tint to the whiskey. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So Teal, like I said, this is a single malt. It's 100% malted barley, a blend of different aged scotches. So with Teeling, they use 5 different wine barrels. So there's some Cabernet Sauvignon barrels, there's some white Burgundy, which is Chardonnay, there's sherry barrels, there's port barrels, and there's Madeira barrels. So they blend a lot of different barrels together to make this whiskey, but it's 100% malted barley as opposed to different grains blended together. Just needs to talk about beer.
All right. Justin's going to talk about beer. So Justin's going to play the opposite side of that question.
Right. No worries. So when it comes to beer, you're not looking at a lot of aging. As you said, we could turn out a beer in 3 days if you really wanted to. A lot of the components you want to use as fresh as humanly possible. There is a new trend out there with IPAs called wet hopped IPAs, where you're literally taking the hops pretty much the day they're picked and throwing them into the boil. That's in order to extract the maximum amount of flavor you can out of those hops. Now, realistically speaking, with shipping and packaging and things like that, you're never getting the freshest hop possible. But all of that being said, with the brewing process, you want to use everything as fresh as you can. Now, speaking of timing, with the beer that hopefully you're all drinking now, it is our seasonal right now. It's called Citrus Sinensis. It's the only thing wrong with the beer is the name's hard to say. So it's a blood orange pale ale, and within the process, the blood orange is actually added in the secondary fermentation portion of the brewing process, so the very last process before you go into bottling. We do this so that there's still some yeast that's left within the batch, and we want it to feed on the blood orange flavor. That way, the reason it's added so late is because we want it to be subtle, noticeable, but not overbearing. You throw that fruit in really early in the process, that yeast is going to eat all of the sugar from all that fruit and be really over the top, like a lot of the fruited, like springtime beers are. We're not real big on fruited beer, so we wanted this to be, like I said, subtle, noticeable, but not overbearing. I'm sure I sugarcoated over a lot of that, but yeah.
All right, guys, we're going to take a couple minutes. You guys finish your drinks. We're going to start back off. We're going to fire up the Tatuai in about 5 minutes. We're going to move over to the Scotch. So if you guys have any questions, fire them off now. That is the last one you're drinking, the Teeling.
Teeling single malt.
Yeah. Oh, Mark, go ahead.
Actually, I was wondering why you chose for this pairing the single malt rather than the single grain teeling.
So,
I understand the difference that there's 5 different finishing methods in the single malt, but it's just Cabernet Sauvignon and the single grain, right?
You're probably right. I don't know. Off the top of my head, I don't know. And I didn't choose it for a pairing. I was, quite honestly, I was going to do more bourbon tonight, but I was in Cape Girardeau last night and today, and my samples didn't come down. So I had, I wanted to do some Canadian, some Irish, and then Scotch and bourbon as well, but my bourbon samples didn't come down. So I was kind of looking through what I had in my truck, and and I had single malt. So, and I think this is about as good as Irish whiskey gets. So, yeah.
You guys doing alcohol?
Great.
Yeah.
It's not being used.
No, because I didn't know what cigars we were pouring, and quite honestly, I'm not good at pairing cigars. I don't have enough experience with cigars to really, to get in deep and pair cigars and whiskey. So.
all right, Dave, what do you got, bud? No question? You had your hand up and you stopped. No? My favorite table in the back. I heard you. You got questions. Go. I'm all over it.
Looking up stuff online and looking at, as far as wines go, a port wine and then how it relates to IPA. It seems like both of them originally were made, like the port was made to make the long sailing voyage somewhere.
Right.
And then they dilute it.
Right.
And I thought IPA was kind of started out the same way. Like it was intended to be stronger when they shipped it, and then they would dilute it at the source, like when they shipped it from England and India or something.
Right. Yeah. So legend has it that's where the India Pale Ale came from. It wouldn't make the trip across the desert without spoiling, essentially. So they just threw a ton of hops in it as a preservative, so that it would make the trip and still have good flavor to it and not be ruined. So that's essentially where it came from. Now that being said, nowadays everything's getting to you within a week or two on a truck, so you don't have to worry about it too much. But the way a lot of these IPAs are brewed nowadays, especially with the wet hop ones that I was talking about earlier, they're intended to be consumed as fresh as humanly possible. So that's where a lot of the date codes you see on beers these days are really useful, so you can see how fresh and how long that beer's been sitting on that shelf. It was, again, you're right, it was intended as a preservative, so it would last longer over time. Nowadays, not really the case.
I asked this because I still have a little, to me it's a little too hoppy in general.
Right.
So I guess I'm just thinking originally, were they diluting this stuff? The flavor wasn't quite that bitter.
I would assume back in the day it was going to be way over, like on the far end of the bitter spectrum. Nowadays, there's no particular dilution. You know, some brews are going for that bitter component. Others we're using specific hops to avoid that bitter component. And those different varietals have been identified, and you know they're thrown into different batches for different uses. Yeah. Cheers. Yeah. Yeah. So sadly enough, that 12th and Ever is going to be going to pretty much Southwest Airlines only here soon, which sucks because it's one of my favorite beers that we've ever done. But yeah.
That's why I fly Southwest.
Right.
Remember that. I fly Southwest.
Right. It's a delicious beer. Unfortunately, that purple can and that confusing name didn't really take off the way we thought it was going to. It's a year-round option as of right now. We'll see where it goes from there. I do love telling the story behind that though. So way back when Tony got the brewery started, his intention was to only bottle beer. That was the way he thought beer should be presented and packaged, and that was his way of putting a quality standard on it. Nowadays, everybody's going to cans. It's cheaper for the suppliers. It's better on the beer, to be honest, because you're not getting that light exposure. But in an interview a few years back before we put the 12th and Ever out, they asked, you know, Tony, when are you going to cans? Everybody else is doing it. And his response was, and I quote, the 12th of fucking never. So whenever we put our first beer into cans, it was brewed specifically to go into cans, and we called it the 12th and never. It's a fantastic story. I love it, but unfortunately, like I said, it's not really taken off the way we thought it was going to. It will be found on Southwest Airlines moving forward, though. Sorry, say that again. In my opinion, so you're asking how much marketing was put behind 12th and Ever compared to other brews? So that one, I mean, we do our fair share of marketing. We're not as prevalent as, say, some of the other big guys like New Belgium or Boston Beer Company, things like that. We'll see where things go. We have our marketing department is growing by the day at this point. Here's to hoping that, you know, we do have more of a push. We do rely on a lot of our steadfast fans over the years being interested in new releases that we have year in and year out. I don't think that there was as big a push behind that one because I think there was the thought that as our first canned beer, people are going to be super hyped on it. I think we kind of learned our lesson on that one, and moving forward, I think you'll see a few more dollars put into it. Yeah.
All right, guys. Here's your the rest. You got about 3 minutes. If anyone needs to do anything else before we light up this tatuaje. Go ahead, Mark. You can fire them up, man. Let's do it.
What's that? Yeah, no spirits. No, so I don't foresee us ever getting into the spirits line. Tony is very steadfast in his line of thinking and very stubborn to change at times. I know there's a lot of other brands right now going into like the ready-to-drink cocktails and trying to capture that market. Where we're spending all of our money right now is weed, actually. So it's legal out in California. We have something called Hi-Fi Hops. It's a non-alcoholic sparkling water that's been infused with hops that we produce and then ship off to the dispensary, and then they infuse it with weed. So that's essentially where we're spending our money right now. Here in the next week or two, we're going to be launching the non-THC version of that called Hoppy Refresher in Missouri. Again, non-alcoholic sparkling water infused with hops is a good alternative to your IPAs. But no, I don't foresee any spirits. Hi-Fi Hops.
The same question as the cigar producers. I asked whether they felt like the increased marijuana production aided into their production or into their profits, and generally I answer that has no effect. But I mean, because we're kind of in a brave new world where this is kind of the basis of a lot of the questions I had earlier about cross-produced products. So I wondered whether I don't know, would we start seeing, you know, marijuana blended cigars or something like that?
So, it's any guy that buys a cigarillo, cuts it open, packs marijuana in it. But we've been doing that since 1998, so it doesn't matter. But the reason you won't see that happen is the FDA is so already cock strong for the rest of all tobacco that marijuana is really not even on their eyesights right now. So because it's being legalized across the nation and everyone's starting to get on board with it, what you won't see is no one in the cigar industry, I hope no one, because what it does for every state that does it is it applies another tax. It's another reason for the FDA to get on top of tobacco. And I think the worst thing that can happen for the cigar world is for marijuana to be involved in the cigar world, because the FDA will come down on us like it's no one else's problem. So when you look at things like beer, even spirits, alcohol, high-end, whatever you want, the FDA doesn't get involved in spirit. As long as your aging is right, as long as your bottling is proper, as long as you follow the guidelines in which the final spirit gets to where it's going, they honestly don't, I'm not going to say they don't care, but they don't pay as much mind to what you're doing with it. And as long as you're in a state or a location where it's available and it's legal and you can do it, they're not going to bother with it. But if it comes into the premium cigar world, you will start to see cigars damper. We're going to go back into a recession as far as tobacco goes. You look at what the FDA did to cigarettes, right? You can't have certain flavorings or infusions or anything in cigarettes anymore. What do you think is going to happen if you take any version of a marijuana plant, even CBD cigars, right? There are no premium industries that are applying CBD into tobacco. There are offset sides, guys that have their own little operation, they're doing their own little thing, and good for them. But if it comes into the mainstream premium cigar world, the FDA will have every right to come down on us harder than they already are, and we're already fighting against that every day just to be able to do what we're doing right now. If the FDA gets it their way, this right here would never happen. It just wouldn't happen.
So, ditto when it comes to beer. That's why we produce the water and then ship it off to the dispensary and let them handle it, because they've got that portion of things down. We know we make a good quality sparkling water with the hops in it. Got that down. Don't have to worry about the FDA on that. We send it off to them and let them deal with that end of things. I think, exactly what you said. If we start throwing THC into actual beer, that's going to be a whole other song and dance that, frankly, right now we're not really interested in getting involved in.
Dave, go ahead. Exactly. Yeah, so if I'm getting what you're saying is any dispensary that's legal in an area, you cannot buy tobacco and THC together in any form. Exactly, and you can't, because what happens is, like I said, the FDA is already so hard on top of us, right? When the FDA investigation all started and they grouped all tobacco together in one billet, that it ruined. I mean, it hurt the industry very bad. There's a reason that, there used to be a time in a year, about 10 years ago, where you'd have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 new blends coming out from everybody all year long. As soon as the FDA came in and started saying anything before 1997 that was not already blended or used in construction, that you can't use it without paying a $10,000 viewing limit per cigar, that ruined a lot of what's going on with the industry now. The fact that the industry is so strong now just proves that we keep fighting against the FDA, because we are not cigarettes. You don't inhale these things. The FDA did a consensus about 14 years ago now. They took 16 individuals over a 10-year period and allowed them to smoke 2 to 3 cigars a day. When that FDA completion was done, there was no extra risk added towards any type of cancer, any type of health defect, any type of health benefit. You don't inhale cigars. Cigars not inhaled. On the main point on that is that there is nothing in cigars that has any raw health effect towards you, because tobacco is a medicinal plant, right? You can have that argument all day with THC and marijuana, but that's not this place. It's got its own thing. It's got its own thing. But it's just we can't ever let that happen. And I would, the first industry that tries to do that inside our group will be ostracized from the world, because you're bringing on a world of hate you don't want. So go ahead.
Okay, how about Santino's cigars, cocktails, and gummy bears?
I like gummy bears. Chief, what's up? You're the chief.
Yeah. Do they put any chemicals in cigars?
No,
So from the plants, there's nothing like
nothing.
cigarettes.
Insecticides aren't even applied to the tobacco. All right, so everyone grab your La Mission from Tatuaje, give it a cut, and light it up. Remember I said we're going to talk about the cigar a little bit? There's something very special. If you look at the age statement on your paper that's in front of you, you'll understand that 1955 in just a couple of minutes. Also, we are moving on to our Scotch profile now. We are going to start with the Glen Grant 12 year. Anyway, so I don't even know where I'm at now. It might go ahead.
Yeah, don't get freaked out by a cigar beetle, guys. You have more organisms in your body that are dormant, and if they ever wake up, you'll be way sicker with what's already growing in your body. Yeah. Another couple of fun facts too. Oh well, I'm taking over. So, So look, in America, we think everything that's bigger is better, right? I'm gonna beg to differ with you guys. A lot of people like to smoke these 6x60 cigars, 7x70, 8x80. Okay. Cigars are not designed to be big ring gauges. When the manufacturer, the roller, makes a cigar, this is typically one of the most prolific sizes, because when they roll tobacco, the bigger the cigar is, they have to add fillers, right? So you're not going to use the same tobacco that makes this cigar if it's 4 times bigger. So you're getting lesser tobacco, sometimes the scraps on the floor, sometimes lesser quality. And so I always challenge everybody, bigger's not better.
That's not what she said. Nothing.
All right, so Scotch. So Glen Grant, 12 years old. So you know, when you're talking about Scotch, you have 3 different categories.
Before he starts, you were all tasting the Glen Grant 12 year.
All right, thanks. Thought I established that, but so you get 3 different categories of Scotch. You have like your bottom shelf blended Scotches, which are going to be some malted barley blended with neutral grain whiskeys. So that's your real cheap stuff. Then you also have blended malts like Johnny Walker. What Johnny Walker is, it's a blend of whiskeys from different distilleries. Then you have your single malts. So your blended Scotch like Johnny Walker's are 100% malted barley. Just those, like I said, blend from different distilleries. Then you have single malts, which 100% malted barley, all comes from one distillery. Anytime you put an age on a whiskey, it represents the youngest whiskey in that bottle. So with this, all the whiskey in here is at least 12 years old. You may have some barrels that are 15 years old. You may have some barrels that are a little older that at 12 years old, they weren't ready to be blended into the 12 years, so they just let them go. And then when they're 15, 16 years old, they represented that style that they want in the 12 years, so they'll blend it in. Now, aging for 12 years in Scotland is a lot different than aging for 12 years in Kentucky, because it's a much cooler, more, well, it's a very rough environment, but it's much cooler temperature, so you don't get as much evaporation, you don't lose as much angel share, and you don't get as much alcohol differences between barrels. One thing you won't taste in this, and someone brought up peat bogs earlier, so outside of whiskeys or scotches from Islay, like 99% of all Highland malts are unpeated. So that's not true. 150 years ago, they would have been peated because that would have been their power source, right? So to make malted, malted barley, what they do is they harvest the barley, they bring it in to the distillery, and they spray it down with water. They spread it on their malting floor. So they let it. Once they get it wet, it starts to germinate, starts to sprout. Then they have to dry it to stop that. So what that germination does is it creates the amylase, which is needed to create those fermentable sugars, because you can't just take barley and ferment it. There's, those starches aren't, you need something to convert it to sugar. So anyway, so all single malt Scotch, 100% malted barley, all copper pot stills, and then, like I said, if there's an age statement, represents the youngest whiskey in that bottle. What I do? Oh, sorry. So I think with these, I get a lot of stone fruit, really easy to drink.
All right, guys. So we're all still enjoying our Glen Grant, right? Okay. Before we get into the cigar and we talk a little bit more about the Scotch, Justin's got something he wants to give away.
Do I now?
Yeah, you do. I didn't bring anything to give away.
I mean, so, okay, so to say thank you for everybody coming out tonight, I did bring some koozies, some bottle openers, and some other random stuff that I'll pull out of my bag. So before you leave, please see me. I've got some random swag for you. Sorry, it's not as cool as what Marc sounded like it was going to be.
All right, so before we keep going, I need the best 3 retro hell experiences right now. Go. It's free. Okay, Dave, go ahead. All right, you know what? I'm going to let Justin grab one of each. He's going to hand them out. How's that? All right, sit still. All right, Mr. Justin Hood from Lagunitas Brewing Company. I funkin' A. That's what my shirt says. Brewed and bottled in Chippewa, Illinois, in the U.S. of A. I believe it. Does anybody, while Justin's handing out his goodies, anybody have any questions so far regarding the cigar or the Glen Grant 12-year? Mr. Marc Seufer. All right, so I'll start, then I'll pass it down to Tony and Mike. I will say I do like the Glen Grant. And you know, Marc, you know me, I'm a Scotch guy. If anyone didn't know that, I'm a Scotch guy. I do enjoy the Scotch, but I will say that Teeling was a very good Irish whiskey. It has a great finish, especially paired with a spicy or fuller bodied cigar. It's got a very good pairing note involved. Now the Glen Grant, as far as the 12-year goes, it's light to me. It doesn't hold up to a lot of name brand, for a lack of word. You take Belvini, Macallan, you know how I feel about Scotches. It doesn't hold up to those, but it does have a very unique, light flavor that definitely complements and plays with what you're smoking. Now, the La Maison that you're smoking now is definitely about 2 grades fuller than the Mr. Brownstone you smoked earlier. So the Glen Grant right now actually plays on the opposite side of the tasting profile and works with the counterbalance and the nuances. But so far the best thing I've tasted tonight, to be honest, is that Teeling. I think it is I've never had it before, and it's great, and I do enjoy it. Dave. Dave agrees. Marc. So what you're going to pull out of the Tatuaje is you're going to have a lot more complexity and flavor build in the cigar. The San Andreas wrapper immediately offers up a dry aged statement. So you get a lot more raw feeling to the tobacco. You get a lot more of a flow involved in the cigar. Now, being Tatuaje, being blended by my father, the liners and the fillers are also a lot older than what you get from Esteban and Brownstone. it is going to be a different complexity in the cigar. So, again, I invite all of you right now. Here we go. Take a draw of your cigar. Breathe it out. Push your tongue against the roof of your mouth. Now, take a sip of your Glen Grant 12-year. Well, he's out. My man. There's nothing left in that glass.
Stuff and things.
How did everyone enjoy their last drink? They were my favorite table, now the second row is my favorite table. You all sit back there and shut up. And don't you have something over there? Alright guys, so what we're going to do is I'm gonna let Mike say goodbye. Then we're going to wrap this thing up a little bit. We got a couple of fun things going on. I think Mike told everyone we are offering our High West Distillery, our Yippee-Ki-Yay at $10 a pour. It's an ounce and a half pour. That is the wrap up on the night. That's going to be the pour to go.
I want to Yippee-Ki-Yay, motherfucker.
It's a Christmas movie. And Bruce Willis is yeah. Also, Justin from Lagunitas has a couple of bottles he wants to hand off, but I'm going to make stories out of those, so you're going to have to work for that. Alright, so I'm going to send this off to Mike. I want the guy behind the entire thing to say bye to everybody. I want to thank everybody for him. None of this would be possible if it wasn't for what Mike had done.
Thank you,
And this place wouldn't be here if it wasn't for what Mike had envisioned and done. So Mike's going to say bye.
Hello. Thanks, everyone. And I'm going to take off. If you have any comments or suggestions to Marc or something you want to do, hold another event. You've mentioned rum now a few times. We'll do that. Just get with Marc. But I appreciate everyone coming. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Unfortunately, I had to leave early. My elderly parents live with me. I'm their caretaker, and I try to get home before they get to bed. All right? Thanks, everyone.
So who drinks Canadian whiskey on a regular basis? That's what
Thanks, Marc. Cameron will be here tomorrow. We're going to take it to Vegas with us. I'm going to let him read the manual.
Canadian, Irish,
and then it's
Scotch, or bourbon?
Cannons are pretty versus my pounds.
Whatever's here.
You know what? She's got her mind right. What are you three doing? Alright, look.
Everybody saying, come up to the table.
Alright, guys, we had a great presentation from Southern Glazers and both Lagunitas tonight. Everyone look at me.
Let's go Blues!
Shut up.
Blues suck!
Thank you.
We'll take that with you, of course you will.
You said.
Alright, everyone look at me, snap. Oh, I got all of them but one and everything else.
Sounded like a teacher.
Did anyone prefer the Canadian versus the Irish versus Scotch and the bourbon? What do you prefer?
I think the Irish, damn it.
The St. Louis whiskey was the best.
Prefer the Canadian
Shut up.
above
15 Scott.
Who likes the Canadian Porsche?
I like the Canadian one's not good.
But the Irish, damn it.
Who would prefer the Irish Porsche?
Hoorah!
Tealing.
Hoorah!
How about the Scotch?
Woo!
Alright, so this is what we got.
Dave wants them all.
You guys are all going to get another pour on us before I release the fun stuff that's going to happen in this event. We're going to talk a little bit more. I hope you're not bored of us yet. But we're going to open this up to questions over everything. You guys are all winding down on your tatuajes. And any more questions, of course, about anything. It doesn't matter. I want to thank everyone for coming to our Q&A tasting panel tonight. Mike had to leave, unfortunately. He has some stuff going on. I want to thank Justin Hood.
Thank you, Justin.
Mr. Lagunitas Brewing Company, and Mr. Tony Watson from Southern Glaze'sr.
So happy to be here.
Everybody, Santino's, we do what we can, and we try to provide the best for everybody. It's not always what fits everyone, but we do what we can to make everything comfortable for everybody. Marc from Santino Cigars and Cocktails, Santino Sunday Cigar Review, just a tip. This is me, you know me. Thank you guys. Have a good night.
For you?